This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Late Late Show on Thursday, the 9th of November, 2023. Unfortunately, work clashes meant that for the last 2 weeks, I've been out of the studio and away from the microphone. But as Arnold Schwarzenegger promised he'd be back, I'm back. It's going to be a straight run from me through until Christmas, which somebody in the gym told me the spring is only 46 days away. Oh dear. It's a hard run for teachers. This is a tough time of the year, and there's an awful lot to get done between now and Christmas.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Now, tonight's show is a show of polarities. Yes, indeed. Here I am in Northern Ireland, and my guest, Rachel Jefferson Buchanan, well, Rachel is in New South Wales, all that way away. It's autumn here, and over there with Rachel, it's springtime. I'm pretty much a morning person, and here I am doing an evening show. And when we get started, it's going to be around about 8 o'clock in the morning with Rachel, who's pretty much a night owl, I think. Now, while the technical people join us up in the background, let me tell you that Rachel is a lecturer in human movement studies at Charles Sturt University in New South Wales. Rachel is a PE and dance and inclusion specialist, and she's fascinated by the moving and creative body. A lot of her work now focuses on fundamental movement skills known as FMS. Now, if you're a principal in Northern Ireland, don't panic. FMS in Northern Ireland means financial management of schools. But actually, there's so little money in schools now, we don't need to worry about finances. There's nothing actually to finance. It's almost easier to tell you who Rachel hasn't worked with, but among some of her most notable collaborations are work with UNICEF and UNESCO, and she has devised PE curricula in Kazakhstan, Egypt, and Myanmar. Rachel, are you there?
Good morning, Paul. I am here. Good morning from Australia.
Good morning from Australia. Goodness. Just turned myself off there by mistake. Yes, isn't it fantastic? Yeah, all the way from dark, wintry Northern Ireland to sunny New South Wales. What's your weather like? Go on, make us all jealous.
Today we're going up to 30 degrees here. It's a beautiful morning in Albury-Wodonga, New South Wales, and the best time of the day to actually get out and exercise and do things. It's a little bit cool in the mornings, but it's going to heat up a little bit later, and it's spring here.
Yeah, I know it's springtime for you. It's all optimism and everything, isn't it? That's great. And 30 degrees, it's going to go up to 30 degrees.
Yeah, a little bit too hot this week. I think it's revving up for summer, which starts in December for us. We always have hot Christmases here. So we're hoping it'll cool down a bit before we enter the 40 plus degrees sometimes at Christmas.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That sounds fantastic. Yeah. Right. But strange all the same for us, isn't it?
It's a little bit weird when you've lived most of your life in the Northern Hemisphere to have a warm Christmas. And I don't think I will ever get used to that. But it is nice to go to the beach if it's not too hot. And it is nice to just be able to get out in nature and so on, rather than being locked up eating many roast dinners in a cold, wet England.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And of course, you're not Australian. you are English, aren't you?
Yes, originally English, but I'm a bit of a nomad and I have worked all over the world with my consultancy work in education, but I have lived in 3 different countries. So born and originally in Plymouth in the southwest of England.
Oh, right,
And yeah, so I can do the accent if you like, I can put it on. Um,
right.
and then I moved to Switzerland in my 20s to work in the International School of Geneva there. And then I moved back to England for 9 years, and I've been out here in Australia for nearly 11 years now.
Wow. Gosh, that all sounds so glamorous. Yeah.
I think tiring is probably the operative word sometimes, but I
Well, it
do
could be that as well.
but I do like to experience different ways of being and living, and I was offered a really good job here, so I guess that was an opportunity not to be missed. And they also offered to pay for my PhD and support me to do that, so that was one of the key reasons I came out here.
Well, those things all help, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. In
Yeah.
academia, it's very hard. If you haven't got a PhD, it's very hard to kind of move up a little bit and get anywhere. It's a very competitive institution.
It is, yeah. Well, you have your PhD under your belt now, and I know you had a little bit of, you just weren't right in at the beginning of the show, but I did talk about, your background and various things and so on, and it's really kind of PE, physical movement, creativity. That's what interests you very much, isn't it?
Yes, very much. My original background is in physical education, but I specialised in dance, and my second subject was special educational needs.
Right.
And originally, I wasn't going to go and do that as a second subject. My whole family were artists and creatives, and I wanted to study art, but unfortunately
Hmm.
that collapsed due to low numbers. So I ended up sort of falling into special educational needs as a second subject. But it's been really handy because movement and also any kind of disability and knowing the body through its competence or inefficiency, etc., it all fits together really well. So looking back on it, it was probably quite karmic that I ended up doing that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, where, what exactly do you do now, Rachel? I know that sounds kind of a bit of a blunt question, but
No,
we
no,
kind of know
not at
your
all.
background, and we're going to come on and we're going to talk about, fundamental movement and so on. But
Mm.
what is it you actually do now on a daily basis?
Too much sitting down and being on a
Oh,
screen,
hmm.
as has happened to us in academia, because most of our courses, particularly here in regional New South Wales, which is very rural, most of them have gone online in the last, I would say 7-8 years pre-COVID, and during COVID even more so. We have students from across the whole of Australia. We're the largest regional provider here in
Yeah.
online learning. So when I first came out here to Charles Sturt University here in New South Wales, it's a huge university with 50,000 students and 5 different campuses. I think we've got 6 now, actually. But basically, what I did initially was come out as a lecturer in human movement studies. So I was teaching primarily health and physical education, working with undergraduates in our Bachelor of Arts honours and our early years degree and our primary degrees. And then later on, I moved into working with Masters of Teaching students as well, as those courses built up. Now I teach creative arts alongside that as well. So I'm heavily involved in pedagogy work with dance and also drama, music, visual arts, media arts, online and also face-to-face. So that's my day job, really. A lot of it involves a lot of screen work because, as I say, quite a few of our subjects have moved online, but we still do have face-to-face subjects as well with practical subjects.
Of course. Yeah. So you mentioned sitting, and of course we all do a lot of it. And well, we do. So where are we, in terms of, humans and so on, where are we in relation to fitness and movement? And, are we in decline? Are we in the ascendancy? Are we stagnant? What's happening with us and our bodies?
Yeah, well, body is my favourite subject. So I'm happy to talk about what I think's happening and also what I have to keep up with in terms of the research that surrounds all of this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad media press out there that doesn't always necessarily tell the truth. As you know, media can very much distort the truth and catastrophize over things. I would say overall, particularly during COVID times, across those 2-3 years, that there was quite a serious decline in everybody's movement initially. But actually there was some quite promising research that was coming out sort of mid and also post-COVID about adults and how they had actually enjoyed going out and doing walking. That became very popular. Cycling became very popular. And so actually we saw this kind of evolution of people having a little bit more time working from home, having more flexibility with all of that, and actually reclaiming some of their physical activity hours. But what we have seen in the last sort of decade or so really is quite a serious decline in children's play time. And that has inevitably consequences for their physical development. Some research is saying that this is partially due to the digital, evolution that we are in, this digital phase, and that we've got too many children on digital devices, too young, and they're not doing what they used to be. So you'll see a lot of that in the media with this, and nobody should have a digital a device anymore because we're all going to end up obese and overweight and inactive and have chronic disease due to that. But in actual fact, that's not true across the board. Some children are definitely engaging in digital devices too young. I mean, the statistics tell us that really we shouldn't be doing that before about 3 years of age. And you do see a lot of children under 3 who are engaging quite frequently in that because it inhibits other natural play drivers in children. So I often say this, and a lot of researchers say it as well, we have work as human beings, and that can be our sort of driver, and it can give us meaning and purpose in life. But in actual fact, for children, play is their driver. They don't work as we do, lucky them. So, play is this beautiful way for them to express themselves. It's their way of keeping busy and active, and they are naturally they're primed for movement. And I always say children are made to move. That's sort of a classic saying that I say quite frequently in my research, in my presentations. So what happens is that there are all sorts of sociocultural reasons, fitness reasons, all sorts of things like that actually affect negatively on children's physical development. And I would say we can add in school to that.
Yeah. So how is school added in the sense that it's...
Well, my research, my PhD focused very much on body regulation, and it looked at the way that the body is constructed through the schooling context. And it particularly looked at physical education as being a tool for certain ways of moving and certain accepted ways of moving. So I looked at that from 1902 right the way through to 2016, picking out sort of discourses that came through policy, that came through education acts, sport policy, etc., in England. So it was an analysis of what was going across a 114-year period in England. And what I found was that government heavily influences, through those documents, heavily influences the way that children are constructed to move. And then teachers, who obviously have some agency in their classrooms, but they have to also follow syllabuses. Teachers then actually are the sort of stakeholders in the school context, and they actually then begin to work with these particular discourses. And some of the discourses that I find that were coming through in PE were very much sort of sport discourses, and discipline discourses. So it was about the body being not able to be liberated in movement, even in physical education. It was actually about, we were teaching children to move in certain ways. And I always say that, particularly in the early years, when you work with very, very young children in early years settings and moving in towards primary, there's a lot more freedom on the level of the body that teachers can nurture there. There's lots of, like play is their medium, play is their, they're out on scooters, they're in the sand pit, I think England, particularly when I think about my experiences there, I always say the early years centres could teach the primary schools a lot on the level of that liberation of the body and the exploration and the guided discovery that they have. And then suddenly children move into these quite formalized school contexts, from year one onwards, really. Reception is a little bit more free, but year one onwards, we've got children sitting at desks too much and being far too inactive regularly.
Yes, I thought that's what you were going to say, yes. And your findings were that policy then, meta policy really has driven that children are forced then to sit down because the curriculum is demanding, it's overburdened.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a huge drive in England. I can speak about that much more confidently because that's the area where my research is. But there are similar things going on here in Australia. We have a huge, basically because we know it's an ex-colony, so we inherited a lot of what we did in England here, and we've made it our own. But there are still huge similarities. But in England, particularly, we've got this big push towards more formal schooling coming in year one and upwards in the primary school. And a lot of the primary teachers I talked to regularly in England when I was living there were actually saying that they didn't agree with it, and that they were far more interested in, more informal contexts, and that they built in more autonomy and more capacity for exploratory learning within the formalized curriculum as much as they could, but that they were forced, their hand was forced really by Ofsted, by government jurisdiction and direction, policies, the syllabuses, the learning objectives, etc., that they had to tick off, and so on. And when we contrast that with, we know that some of the best standards that we have in education, it's well known that the Scandinavian countries are far more informal right up until the age of about 7 and 8. That's an interesting point, isn't it? It's why do we do what we do? We want to be the best in the world in England, don't all nations? But why do we head so quickly into this formalized instruction and regulation of our bodies.
Yeah. And is there a price to be paid for rushing into that and trying to kind of formalize and have children sitting in rows and, learning?
Well, I think there is, and a lot of research that's coming out, generally across Western nations particularly, is that children's health and fitness levels, their physical development, etc., and also worrying levels at times. It's, again, the media catastrophizes a lot of that, but obesity, certainly overweight and obesity in young children, all of those are affected by the amount of time that children are allowed to be physically active. And it's well known that the schooling context actually deactivates children. There's been lots of studies on that actually look at summer periods, for example, when you have the 6 weeks of summer holidays in England, as I recall. It's a whole different seasonal thing out here. But in July, August, children in England and across the UK, I'm sure, end up being far more physically active and more expressive, more creative, and doing a lot more on a physical level when they're not hampered by this much more formalized at tables kind of instruction. And so there have been tests on children's fitness levels and their well-being levels as well, because of course it's intimately tied with health and fitness. And they're saying, that at the end of the summer there is this surge and this increase in well-being, and health and fitness levels have gone up and so on. So what are we doing in the school context, and how can we try and have similar body freedoms within the schooling context to enable children's well-being to improve? Because certainly since COVID, we've had huge increases in mental illness in Australia and across the world. And I follow England a lot, and similar issues there, higher levels of mental illness, etc. And we know that being more physically active releases endorphins, and we actually can use this as a wonderful medium to get children moving more and to be feeling better about themselves.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I wouldn't have the knowledge that you have, and certainly not the research, but absolutely very big fan of all of that movement and so on. And but before we move on to an aspect of that, do we do PE well in schools? Do we do it well?
Oh, this is the $1 million question. Well, if you read any media article in the last 10 years, then you'd say no. Because the media, I always say this to my research group that I work with, the media are great at bashing PE.
Well, that's their sport. Their sport is teacher bashing.
It certainly is.
And they enjoy it.
They do enjoy it. You've got to be very grounded to actually be able to manage that kind of adversity that's coming your way as a teacher. And it's exactly the same here in Australia. We have so much teacher bashing here in the media. Yeah. So, and I think PE gets a really hard hit by the media. And what I have tracked, because I'm quite fascinated by the media, and I work a lot in social media as well, and Twitter and Facebook. So I run Facebook groups and things like that on physical education and health and movement. And all of that, what I hear and see is a lot of stories from teachers, but I also, to the contrary, but I hear a lot of this PE bashing, and what interests me is that it surfaces whenever there is a monumental sport event.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
And it's like, you need a drum roll here, really. Lionesses, yeah. I don't know if
Yes.
you read some of the Lionesses media, or you listened to Ian Wright talking about the need to have more PE and
Yeah.
have more
Yeah.
football in PE,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And it just it was like we got this tidal wave of PE bashing. And
Yeah.
also this all these deficit discourses around what we do in PE. So if I come back to your original question, on the level of media, you'd think that we were doing a dreadful job. However, when I go into schools and I watch and I observe and I have a look and support teachers as well, and obviously support my teacher education students, many of them are actually doing a pretty good job considering the amount of training that they've had in physical education or physical development in the early years, and considering the time pressures that there are in schools to actually develop any kind of physicality for young children. So they're going in, and there are, we know that a lot of teachers are time poor, they're overworked, they're underpaid, they have their professional status being questioned regularly, there's too much government intervention, there's accountability measures that are relentless, that's the only word I can find for it, which is all part of that whole neoliberalism in which we're living right now. But they're doing the best that they can. But how can they develop children physically in 2 to 3 lessons a week, which is the average secondary school PE curriculum? And in primary, physical education is often the first lesson to be dropped. That's my experience. And it's also what's coming through in some of the research as well. Quite a lot of the research says that PE and the arts are often squeezed. And that is because they are, thank you to government for this, they are deemed to be foundation subjects as opposed to core subjects, which again comes from this deficit view of what physical education and the arts offer to the curriculum. And it also comes from this view of, it's a very top-down sort of hierarchical view of subjects that is not based in any research whatsoever, in the sense that if you do more PE with primary children, you don't get better results in maths and English. If you do less PE, you don't get better results in maths and English. So therefore, why don't you do more PE?
But Rachel, that's not true at all. Sure, it's not.
Well, what we've found is that children become happier and that there is a well-being effect. But what we don't find is that we see massive impact on skills and fundamental movement skills if there is more PE, because that is a very complex space. There are all sorts of other influences on fundamental movement skills, such as whether you're overweight or obese, your levels of fitness, whether you play regularly in terms of being outdoors when you get home from school, how much playtime is given, etc., etc. And it's not about the school being the solution to the development of fundamental movement skills, because we must have a more of a holistic approach with family and community being involved too. But you're never going to develop every single fundamental movement skill to a proficient level through PE. You're never going to do that, which is why coming back to Ian Wright saying we need more football in PE is ludicrous. Sorry, Ian, I love you to bits, but you're never going to develop. And why would we want to have more football in the primary context? Football is not what we do in the primary context. We learn about the body, and we often say we learn to move and we move to learn. And we have many different physical activities that we engage in, not sport, and certainly not developing the elite future football team for England.
Yeah, sure. Sure. And that's an interesting distinction there. I'm not, yeah, yeah, you just kind of said it. Yes, there's a difference between physical education and sport. And I know when
Well,
I went to
mm,
school, yeah, well,
mm,
you're probably going to disagree with me, but I know when I went to school, which was a very long time ago, um, yes, our PE teacher would have made that distinction. PE lessons were different from the sport that we played as
mm.
extracurricular activities, you know, on teams or athletics or whatever.
Mm, mm. I like that you did that, and it was the same for me as well, because I went to
Mm.
school a long time ago too. Um, and I know that physical education was always sort of sacrosanct, really. And I don't know if you remember going back to infant school and junior school, but I remember having these amazing because obviously I was really into dance and movement. And so it was a
Hmm.
happy memory for me. But I remember being in little PE knickers and a little vest when I was about 6, 7
Well, I
years
don't
old.
remember that. Rachel.
You may have had a bare chest. Um, but
What did you say? I may have had a bare chest. Oh,
because that's how it was in the
see what
in
you
the
mean now.
six in the 60s and 70s. That's what how PE was done. There were no t-shirts. The boys were in bare chests and PE
Skins
knickers
and shirts.
or
Skins and shirts.
pants. Yeah,
Yeah. They were the
exactly.
teams. Yeah,
E-
skins and shirts. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the
Hmm.
girls were there with our little vests and shorts or
Hmm.
PE knickers, athletic knickers we
Hmm.
called them as well, or PE knickers.
Oh my
Not
goodness,
bloomers. I'm
that's
not
four
that
times.
old.
That's four times she said knickers. I mean, we're going to be banned here.
It's a
Anyway,
pantomime. It's a pantomime throwback. They always say knickers in pantomimes.
that's
Um,
true. Mhm.
but I remember that feeling of, with the music on and moving around the hall and dancing. And it was very
Yeah.
free flow and very, very much. We have these little cassettes, these music and movement cassettes, and that the
Hmm.
teachers would
Hmm.
put those on, and we would all just,
Yeah.
run around, and it was very liberating as a child. So that's
Hmm.
obviously why I remembered it. So
Yeah.
that kind of freedom, those sort of physical activities that are more liberated, which we might formally call dance or gymnastics
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
secondary context, those used to be commonplace in the primary school. And we did a lot of folk dance. We learnt about patterns and rhythms and steps and all of those things. And that has a wonderful connection with core subjects. So,
Hmm.
maths, for example, links to pattern and space and direction and rotation and
Hmm.
symmetry and asymmetry, etc., all of these basic concepts. So we have ended up, by evolving our curriculum, what we have done is made it far more formalized. We've made
Hmm.
it far more top down. So we've kind of introduced um, physical activities such as dance, gymnastics, games, which features primarily in primary, which we never
Yeah.
used to have in physical education decades ago. We had just sort of movement, and physical education was movement in different ways, whether that was through
Hmm.
changes in space or using objects such as balls or scarves or
Hmm.
but that is government driven. Government has actually
Well,
decided that.
can I ask you then, Rachel? And I suspect on this you're probably of the same view I am, although again, I have no research on this. We were always told when I was at school, we were always told, and this is anecdotal, that pupils who played sport, especially if you played, at a fairly good high level, you represented the school and so on and so forth. In general, those pupils were more academically successful. And I've heard you, say or talk about similar things. You had a lovely phrase there about interspersing and integrating,
Mm,
the physical body movement as a way to improving learning and concentration.
mhm, mhm.
Is that a fair conclusion that, a higher level of, physical activity does have a positive impact on academic learning and outcomes?
Well, years ago, we wouldn't have had the capacity to say that definitively. But
Yes, it was
now,
anecdotal, we would have been
yeah,
told.
so now,
Yeah.
but now we've got all sorts of amazing, brain research that's coming through, and
Yeah.
attention research, motivation
Oh,
research. Go
oh,
on.
you've just reminded me. Yes, you've just reminded me. We had the wonderful Dr. Aideen Slattery on the show here a while
Uh-huh.
back, and that you've just pinpointed what her research is all about,
Hmm.
and it's about how physical activity has a positive impact on what are the two things? Attention and memory.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, I'll just give her, Aideen, a shout out because I believe actually she's just got herself a new job. I think, yes, somewhere, I think, is it in down the Shannon or somewhere. So, congratulations to Aideen. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, no problem at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, there's been a great increase in looking at particular case studies with physical activity and then measuring children's motivation, their attention, and also, as
Mm,
you mentioned, their memory as well, and particularly concentration. Obviously, you can get similar effects as well with interventions such as mindfulness. So I'm trained in mindfulness as well. So there's a lot of research out there on
yeah.
how you can actually build attention through other means. But it's now pretty well known research wise, and it's quite new research because of our capacity to examine the brain more and do it in a more kind of stringent way.
Mm,
We have this effect. So although we're not saying that all children will improve their academic attainment levels, that's the difference. Is that we're not saying that by doing PE or more physical activity during the day, you will definitely improve your academic attainment. That's
mm,
that's too complex. That has too many other factors. There are DNA, nature, nurture reasons for
sure.
levels of
Yeah.
academic attainment. But what we can say with, certainty is that you can actually see improved levels of concentration, improved levels of attention. But more than anything, which I always think is really important, is that children's motivation and their desire to learn can actually be improved through
Mm,
the introduction of more physicality, which is natural to them. It's unnatural for them to be sitting all day. And
mhm,
through that change of approach within the physical education context, obviously, but within all subjects, that we
mm,
have be more mindful of children's physicality and build in regular moments of physical outlets for them during the day, then we do see happier children, we see more motivated children, and obviously there are these knock-on effects to attention and memory and so on. So
mm.
yeah, it's really interesting neurologically what's going on.
Certainly is, yeah. So you've said a few times, that particularly with young children, there is that natural inclination to be physical. And we know
Mm,
that, they want to
mm-hmm,
climb things, they want to play, they want to do this, that, and the other, and all. And it's great and it's fantastic to watch them. Now, my observation, and to be fair, my observations would mostly be post primary, 11 to
mm,
19. And something happens a lot of children in that intervening time, and they go down one of two paths. So you get this dual kind of thing, but they're very divergent. You get a lot of children who very quickly become resistant to
mm,
any PE, any sport, anything physical. We brought dance teachers in, we brought yoga teachers in, or anything. They were very, very resistant.
mm,
And you get the others who just embrace the
mm-hmm,
physical and maybe go down the sport road. And I used to talk to young fellas who were maybe part of a football club, and they had a nutritionist, they had a dietitian, they had individual coaches. It gets very divergent. Would that be your experience too?
I think there is sometimes this sort of binary situation, as you say, with the sporty jocks, mentality, and then you have these resistant is a good word. There's resistance, there's reluctance, there's all sorts of reasons for that. I think, and I've written a book chapter on it in the past, that the bridge between primary and secondary is a very, very tricky transition, and that's the terminology that I've used, in the sense that we have these, as I say, these natural drivers to move, and nature's got it all worked out. Nature actually puts these drivers in us. We're biologically programmed. You watch the average toddler, you watch the average 4 or 5-year-old, they never sit still. They are moving all the time, and that's because they are wiring up. And so the body says you need to move, and they're reaching, they're stepping, they're jumping, they're catching, they're doing all sorts of amazing things all the time. Now, what happens is, when they are wiring up, and a lot of research tells us that by the age of about 8, 9 years old, children should be pretty much proficient in the basic movement skills: catching, running, jumping, hopping, galloping, catching, throwing. I probably repeated myself there, but those types of fundamental movement skills that are recognized globally. So my theory is that, those natural drivers sometimes can sort of begin to wane. And that when we move into the secondary, which is a far more formal context where PE is compartmentalized, you don't get the opportunity to be, moving around the classroom so much in the secondary context. Again, the introduction of tables and chairs, which, by the way, there is no research in the entire world that tells us that that's the best way to learn. But it's still there. So they move into tables and chairs, separate subjects, physics, chemistry, blah, 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 blah. And then they have PE. So what we're doing is we're compartmentalizing children's physical activity routines. And at the same time, we've got the hormones kicking in. And so that's
I understand
major.
that. I do understand that, yeah.
And then, of course, we've got issues within secondary PE, and these are well known, and research talks a lot about this, is that some physical education teachers can take a more sort of sport framed physical education way of doing things. So we have a plethora of competitive team games, and we have teacher education students in secondary. We often find that there is this correlation between people who want to train in secondary PE will end up being your games players, who are your sporting jocks, who will end up becoming the PE teachers, and then they'll go on, and it's a vicious cycle. They don't ever really do much in dance or gymnastics or any of the other more sort of free flow areas, and they focus their curriculum more on competitive team games. So not all, but there is a large amount of games being taught in the secondary context. And we know, particularly teenage girls, there is this huge dropout in terms of competitive sports. And they therefore can become extremely inactive, not only in the school context, but beyond the school context.
I think you're right. Yes, it's very difficult to watch, and it's very difficult to entice them back into kind of any kind of physical movement, let alone any sport or anything.
Yeah, I think it's about, for me, and I always used to work in schools and work with teachers a lot in England, and I used to say, they used to raise these kinds of issues to me, and I would say it's got to start with year 1. And it's about changing the culture of physical activity and physical education within your school from year 1. For example, I was out in the International School of Geneva for 13 years. And in that time, they have a primary through to senior school. So they have grade 1 to grade 13. So I taught every single child in that school from grade 1 through to grade 13. By the end of grade 12, 13, we'd had a huge impact on those children's physicality. across that time. And what we did was we changed the culture of PE. So we began to introduce more choice. I developed a brand new senior PE curriculum, and then we put that out to students, and we asked for their result, the survey. We asked for their feedback on it, and we changed it and we developed it so that they had choices. They didn't have to do competitive sports. They could do more recreational and leisure-based options, and also they could go off campus and do certain things like climbing walls, bowling. We did all golf swings, we did all sorts of really leisure-based activities that would lead them into physical activity beyond school. So we know from the research that's out there that most children drop competitive team sports when they leave school. So my big question here is, why are we teaching so much of it then? And there's no reason for it apart from tradition, apart from teacher training. There's all sorts of things that we need to re-examine here and say, okay, so, how are we going to make being physical more meaningful, more relevant, more contemporary, more 21st century for our secondary children particularly?
Good points, Rachel. Yeah. So at this point, we need to listen to the news now. So we'll be back after these messages.
Just Finance Foundation proudly sponsors Teachers Talk Radio for Talk Money Week. Join us from Saturday the 4th of November for a week of incredible guests and thought-provoking discussions on how teachers can talk about money in the classroom. Tune in, be inspired, and empower the future generation. Teachers Talk Radio, sponsored by Just Finance Foundation, helping children manage money wisely. Visit our website for the schedule and details, justfinancefoundation.org.uk.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The COVID inquiry caused shockwaves for government this week as it featured comments from a variety of civil servants and advisers to ministers and the then PM Boris Johnson. Language used by Dominic Cummings in WhatsApp messages caused consternation for many, including the BBC live feed, as apologies were repeatedly issued for some choice phrases. However, Schools Week have featured the reactions of many education leaders to news that the then Education Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, was opposed to face masks in school because he didn't want to surrender to unions. Only after mounting pressure were masks recommended for staff and pupils when they returned to school. School leaders who lost members of their staff have referred to delayed decisions and changing guidance as unforgivable. The inquiry also heard from Lee Kane, a former Number 10 Director of Communications, who revealed that the then PM Boris Johnson said we needed to draw a line in the sand on public spending commitments in relation to funding school meals for pupils not in school. Kane said this was a huge blunder and that the PM was told this was not the place to draw the line. Helen McNamara, a former Deputy Secretary of the Cabinet, also said there had been a lack of guidance for women who were or might be pregnant, and that this was significant in education given the demographic of the workforce. Schools Week highlights data from the Office for National Statistics, which shows 139 teaching and educational professionals aged 20 to 64 died from COVID-related illness between March and December 2020. The ONS stopped recording the data in January 2021, although COVID deaths were still widespread. Unions have reacted with anger at the reports that lives were likely put at risk because of decisions made by government. Kate Bell, Assistant General Secretary of the TUC union, said, "Lives were put at risk because ministers were pursuing a petty political vendetta." The Guardian features a report that head teachers and researchers strongly recommend that parents and carers do their own research when choosing a school and avoid making judgments based on Ofsted reports. The article features a series of top tips from school leaders after another Guardian article stated that official inspection reports were not a trustworthy guide to school quality. The piece featured comments from former Conservative Education Secretary Justine Greening, who said ministers should consult with parents over what they needed to know about schools. Other former Education Secretaries David Blunkett and Kenneth Baker said the whole inspection regime needed an overhaul. Former Ofsted leader Sir Michael Wilshaw also told MPs that he no longer supported the use of single-phrase judgments, which Ofsted and the government have both defended as useful for parents. Lord Baker, Education Secretary under Margaret Thatcher, suggested schools be examined on their destination data, describing it as a key judgment for a school because it's important to know what happens to them next. Meanwhile, if you are considering a school now or in the future, the leader's top tip is to visit the school. The article also recommends speaking with parents and pupils, looking at published data such as performance tables and attendance figures, although that data comes with the caution to consider the impact of COVID in recent years. The BBC reports that in Northern Ireland, the Department of Education has announced that there will be no extra money for teachers' pay, despite rises in England. Typically, the devolved administrations get additional money when a spending decision is made for England, known as the Barnett formula. But the 6.5% pay rise for teachers in England was funded from existing Westminster budgets. Therefore, there is no additional money for Stormont to help end the long-running stalemate over teachers' pay. Teachers in Northern Ireland have not had a pay increase for nearly 3 years. Many teachers in England, Scotland and Wales now earn thousands of pounds more than their Northern Ireland counterparts. For example, from September, new teachers in England earn £30,000 a year. In Scotland, a probation year teacher earns more than £32,000, and new teachers in Wales just under £31,000. This compares to just over £24,000 a year for a newly qualified teacher in Northern Ireland. The DE in Northern Ireland said pay increases were simply unaffordable because there was no funding for the Northern Ireland Executive to pay for it. Finally, the BBC also covered a speech by children's novelist Lucy Hawking at an independent Cambridge school. The writer is the daughter of physicist Stephen Hawking, and she gave the speech entitled How to Make a Better World to 120 pupils at Sancton Wood School. The speech was given as the keynote address for the Thriving Minds Symposium workshops, giving pupils an opportunity to meet experts in a range of fields. Ms. Hawking writes science books for children and described her books as giving them a way into science and technology. The one-day event was held for 120 pupils in years 6 to 10 from schools across Cambridge. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Hello, welcome back everybody. Rachel, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, yeah.
That's good. Well, we don't have a lot of time left until the show's really over, but what do schools need to do, Rachel, in order to improve, the whole movement, health, physical education? What should schools be doing? Anybody listening to the show, what could they do tomorrow morning and over the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, I think when we look at the related research, we do know that schools are central institutions for developing physical activity in young people, and and so all teachers, not just PE specialists, have a pivotal role, I would say, to help support and scaffold children's physical development, but particularly fundamental movement skills, which are majorly learned in this period of time. Statistics tell us that 500 hours of PE are taught during the primary age phase. So that's a lot of hours where you can have an influence on a child's PA levels. I think essentially, that some primary teachers and early years teachers are working on the back foot sometimes with the amount of training that they've had, but that can be remedied within the school context if there is a community of practice, and if the school has a whole school approach to developing children's physical development in similar ways to how they would develop their numeracy and literacy skills, and prioritizing it in terms of their well-being and giving them as many opportunities as possible to actually be physical within the classroom context in any area that they're teaching, and also recommending more play would be something that I would say would be more important, because that's got masses of research out there, more than a century old, to say that, play for all of us, children and adults, we need to play too, is very, very motivational and very good for our well-being. So develop a community of practice, try not to confine fundamental movement skills to physical education and play times, weave it into your lessons, weave it into your transition times. For example, if they're going out to break, you could get them all to stand behind their chairs and try balancing on one foot, and that's a really good way to help them develop their vestibular skills. Their balance on one leg is really important, and particularly important as we get older, to keep working on our balance too. So and also there are lots of resources out there. So I definitely have found lots of wonderful resources myself, just Googling fundamental movement skills, play, etc. And there's masses of resources that they can find where they can get assessment checklists and things like that to test children, but also have more informal ways of testing them on the level of conversations with them about what they do outside of school, and building that into a more of a sort of family and a community-based approach. And also giving them home learning, maybe, for example, say, all right, this weekend I'd like you to, maybe not in the middle of winter when it's muddy, but maybe I'd like you to go and roll down a grassy hill, go find a hill, and roll down it, because that's a really important thing for children's multi-sensory development. They can set things like hopscotch competitions at home with a member of the family, all sorts of fun things like that. There's lots of stuff that they can do informally, and so that it's not just the school's responsibility, but it's a community responsibility.
Yeah. And I know you're a big supporter and promoter of movement and so on being fun and being enjoyable. We probably haven't talked about that directly, but it's nonetheless it's a byproduct of everything that we've said. I think making it enjoyable, making it fun is very important, and children are much more likely then to come back for more and repeat and extend and expand on those experiences, I think.
Very, very true. And, that's something that I've advocated for many years. But I think that when we actually stop with the control and we let the reins go, and we're still managing the class, but when we allow them to have this free exploration and, just go and work, pick up a scarf and see what you can do with it, and a chiffon scarf, and watch it float, and how many body parts can you actually catch the chiffon scarf with. Children are moving, they're stretching, they're bending, they're twisting, they're laughing, that kind of more sort of free exploration, rather than line up here, everyone has a ball each, you release the ball when I tell you to. We have to think about how we're teaching children's physicality, as opposed to not necessarily what we're teaching, but think about how we're doing it and whether we're actually bringing pleasure into children's lives when it comes to movement.
Yeah. Rachel, sadly, we're almost out of time. And as is now traditional on this show, I always ask a question. And the question to end the show is, if you had a magic wand and only one spell to cast, what change would you make to education that would significantly improve the lot of teachers?
Yeah, I think I've probably already mentioned that, but I would like to definitely see less government interference with what goes on. For me, I've watched the decline of teachers' autonomy during my 35-year career in academia and in the school context as well. And with that comes, a decline in morale, and the feeling as though you're being observed and you're not regarded as a professional who knows what they're doing. So I would definitely say that government needs to have less of an influence upon teachers at the coalface. And I think that then we would definitely make great strides in terms of teachers' well-being as well, which is a phenomenally profound issue across the world, and particularly post-COVID.
Yeah, super duper. Let's hope that happens. Yeah. So if I'm right, and you and I both struggled to work out the time difference this morning. If I'm right, it's already... I know. We were even using the internet and we still couldn't get it right.
No, we didn't believe in the internet, did we?
We didn't. No, we didn't. We were skeptical of it, indeed. We were indeed, yeah. And you don't even need £30 phone calls for that. I used to say it cost you £30 to phone home, but
it used to, yeah. Very, very great, absolutely fabulous. We have free, quote unquote, internet now that helps us to connect across the globe. Wonderful.
Yeah. So if we're right, then it's already Friday with you. Is that correct?
Yes, Friday morning, time for the weekend. Tick, tick, tick. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, so my day is just beginning officially.
Yes. So you're going to hit the weekend before us, and you're going to have this wonderful, sunshiny, 30-degree, fabulous weekend. Oh,
absolutely. I shall be out on my bike at 4 o'clock because I started early this morning with your radio show. So I'm out on my bike at 4.
Great. Well, look, have a fabulous weekend, Rachel. It's been magnificent talking to you. Really enjoyed it. And all the listeners will get so much, and there'll be lots of information go into the show notes. Rachel, thank you very much and take care.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for listening, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.